Are comics a dead end job? That may be the most depressing thought I've had in a long time, and we're going to get into it today. My name is Guillory. I'm a comic book creator, and the purpose of my channel is to encourage, inspire, and I hope give insight into the strange world of comics. Let's get into it. Hey folks, welcome back for another episode. As always, I appreciate you guys tuning in. This week we're going to be talking about a pretty heavy question. And chances are, if you are in the comic industry for really any expanse of time, there's a pretty strong chance that you have probably asked yourself this very question. And the question is comics a dead end job? I'm laughing because I've recorded this several times, trying to get a feel of exactly what my feelings are on this thing. And this is a super complex issue. Right off the bat, I'm going to say that there's not going to be the time to get into all aspects of this. But what I have focused on is really kind of laying out, I think, how my paradigm for the comic industry has changed throughout the years, through the last 20 years. So everyone's take on this is going to be different. Everyone's trajectory in comics is going to be different. No two people have the same set of skills. We're all coming at this from different angles, but I have found that there tend to be good ideas and bad ideas about how to strategize your career. So that's what I'll be getting into today. Hopefully providing you guys with some helpful tips to avoid what is a bad situation. So namely, this was sort of inspired by something that I saw in the last couple of weeks. And honestly, this kind of thing happens from time to time where you have a comic creator who has been in the industry for any expanse of time, and they have been in it for years. They've been knocking around from publisher to publisher, doing various gigs, being busy. But then at some point, at the end of that, they sort of take a moment a moment of clarity kind of shows up, and they take an inventory of everything, and they realize, as much work as they've done, there isn't much to show for it, which is a terrifying feeling. We all want our work to bear fruit. That's a human thing. No matter what industry you're in, you want to think that you're building something for the long term. The thing is with comics is that can be elusive unless you are very, very strategic and intentional about how you run your career. So first off, I want to get into how my paradigm of comics has shifted throughout the years. And I've found that for new creators, but especially for folks outside of the industry, there tends to be a specific paradigm of what the comic industry is. And I was totally guilty of this as well. When I first broke into comics, my view of what comics was very much influenced by all the jobs I had before I ever broke into the comic industry. I had many jobs. I worked at Walmart for a time. I worked in various frozen food departments, dairy departments. I worked at video stores. I worked in the oil field. I was all over the place. And all the jobs I had pre-comics had a standard trajectory. You entered in at the bottom and you paid your dues for a time, and you just worked. And over time, you built some kind of stability as you moved up the ladder. And when I projected that onto comics for really, before I got into it, and in the early years of me being in it, I projected that on comics. I assumed that you came in as a nobody, you were on the bottom, and you just worked, and over time, you would arrive at some stability. And I assumed that stability in the beginning was probably going to be at a Marvel or at a DC Comics. That once you got on Spider-Man or Superman, I figured that that's probably where the stability was. And of course, as time went on, and as I moved forward in the industry, I realized that really wasn't the case, because I saw numerous people who had been in that highly coveted spot of working on a Spider-Man, working on a Superman, and they didn't have anything to show for it in the long run. So I immediately got a lay of the land and saw that comics is essentially, at its core, it's basically the Wild West, really. It is a bunch of mercenaries. We're all hired guns, kind of going from gig to gig, looking for things, looking for what will be the gig that sort of propels me to the next level, whatever that is. And because of that, because we're all so busy just going from thing to thing, I think the thing that has kind of kind of interesting about comics and possibly dangerous about comics is that there is the illusion of productivity. There's the illusion of building something. As you are working on something, you're very busy, but unless you're really intentional, if you're just working on other people's projects, you're not necessarily building anything for yourself. You're building things for other companies. When you work for a Marvel or a DC, you're never going to own Spider-Man. You're not going to own the Hulk or whatever. You're basically being paid a pay trade with some residuals depending on how much work you do, depending on how well the issues you work on sell. But for the most part, you're not going to own anything there. So in in the work for hire sphere, if that's all you do and it's not strategic, and if you're not taking what you earn there and sort of investing it in other things for your future, it's very easy to go along for a long period of time and not have anything to show for it. So what I learned immediately was that we are basically all entrepreneurs. We're all solo entrepreneurs in the comic industry, which can be a little. This is really, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, we're solo entrepreneurs. And again, as I've spoken about on this channel before, businessy things tend to be uh, it's oil and water when it comes to artists. A lot of times, a lot of artists don't want to think of themselves within the context of business. But what you quickly learn from being in comics is that we are we are business people. We are entrepreneurs, and ultimately, the whatever gigs we get, where we end up, and what we build is on us. It's not on Marvel. It's not on DC. It really is on us all individually to be good stewards of our careers, whether that is at Marvel and DC, whether that is in creator-owned comics. What this means is that our actions and our decisions in our career basically decide if we will end up in a dead end or not. So it is really on us, not so much on Marvel and DC or any of these companies to take care of us, because they're not going to take care of us. That's not what they do. Right away, that kind of blew up my idea of what comics was. There was never going to be a place where I'd arrive to where a company would take care of me and there would be no 401ks. That's not what comics are. So basically what I'm saying is what we do in our careers today, the intentional decisions we make, the strategic gigs that we make, that we take, will influence us 20 to 30 years down the road and will influence whether or not we have anything to show for ourselves. So we have to be intentional about this stuff. We have to really focus on what kind of career we're looking for. And what I would like to do is focus on the two particular types of comic models, comic ownership models that are primarily in our industry. Of course, we have the Marvel DC stuff, as I just mentioned. That's going to be owned by corporations, essentially. And that's straight up just a gig. That's just you passing through. There's not a lot of actual building anything for yourself there, at least in terms of intellectual property, in terms of actual assets and owning characters. That's not what Marvel and DC are. That's you coming in, being hired by them to rehabilitate Spider-Man and make Spider-Man more profitable, make him something that people actually buy. So again, this could be a boost to your career in terms of cachet. You get to say that you were the guy who worked on Spider-Man. Now, whether or not that translates to long-term monetary gain, that's sort of depending on, again, the sales of the book, how much work you do on it, and also how you invest what you earn from those companies. But again, if you're unwise with it, you can end up nowhere. You can end up with a fairly significant body of work at a Marvel or DC or any corporate place where you work for hire, you're not owning anything. You could end up at the end of that with nothing to show for yourself unless you are wise in the actual investing, in actually taking the money that you make from these projects and investing them in other things, whether that's assets like real estate, land, things outside of comics, which I think flat out is a great idea, but also possibly taking parts of what you earn and applying that to other projects, namely stuff that you do own, which is where I'll segue into talking about creator-owned comics. Creator-owned comics, I am biased. The vast majority of my career has been in creator-owned comics, which means I own what I make. And the beauty of that is when you own what you make, you get to choose how that project or how that story or that character is exploited in the world, whether or not that gets optioned into TV shows or video games, toys, whatever. You get to decide that. And the beauty of that is when you own it, you're the one who benefits from it. It is not a corporation that benefits from it, it's you. So that creator-owned comics really are a long-term asset. You know, with Marvel and DC, unless you're very wise in how you use these gigs, it can turn into very short money. It can be an immediate payday with nothing really, not a lot in the long term if you don't play your cards right and invest in other areas. But with creator-owned stuff, that's generational. That is a generational investment. For instance, with my creator-owned work that I've done in the past, my project Chew over at Image Comics, I did this over a decade ago. This project is still generating opportunities, it's still generating profit long after it's been created. And the beauty of it is I made it one time and it is still working for me. It will be working for me, God willing, for years and years to come. New opportunities will continue to arrive, and I will still benefit from this long after I'm done with it. There's a certain magic that happens with creator-owned comics that I have found does not happen when it comes to work for hire, because you're not in control of work for hire. You're not in control of those characters. So you have no choice in how those characters are exploited. But when you own it, it basically, after you complete the work essentially becomes a living thing. It goes out into the world. It goes into people's hands. You never know whose hands it's gonna turn up into, and people will connect with the work in ways you don't expect. People will email you and contact you and want to partner with you, invest in you, build long-term legacies with you. So because of that, I would say that creator-owned comics, if you are looking for a long-term strategy in terms of comics and building something in the long term, I think that creator-owned comics are the way to go for that. Now, not every creator-owned comic is going to be a hit, but it is, if you're going to make comics, I think that dedicating at least a portion of your energies to making something that you own is a incredibly valuable. It's something you need to do. It's something I advise every person, every creator to do. You need to make something that's great, that you're passionate about, that is yours, that will work for you in the long term. But again, I don't want to leave out any of the Marvel DC guys. I've seen. There are Marvel and DC creators who I think have been very wise with what they make. Yes, they're working on characters they don't own, but I think if you can leverage the work that you do at these places, leverage that into original art sales, leverage that into taking some of the profit you're making from those companies, those corporations, and investing them into characters you do own. I see a lot of Marvel and DC folks moving over to Image Comics, making creator-owned stuff that they actually own. I think this is a great idea. The key, I think, in general, is just diversification. You need to, I think, staying purely in one place in comics is never a good decision. And I've seen people do this over the years. I've seen people who have stayed at certain companies, certain work for hire gigs for years and years and years and years, and they never advocate for themselves. They never push for higher rates. They never take leaps into other places and diversify their portfolios. They just stay in this one spot in comics. Again, appearing busy, but not actually building anything in the long term. So I think that is the place where comics can turn into a dead end. If you end up in a place where you're just spinning your wheels and you're busy, but you're not building anything for yourself, and you're not taking from the profit you're making and investing it in other areas. As I said, in places like real estate and things outside of comics, you need to put the long-term plan is to create assets, to create something that will accrue value and that will actually roll back and come back and work for you and actually put money in your pocket in the long term. Again, I know a lot of comic creators don't like talking about money, but if we're talking about jobs, we're talking about business, we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about long-term savings, securities. We need to think about these things, because that is one of my worst fears, is to get to the end of my career, to be in my 70s or 80s, and to have nothing to show for it, and to basically be in a position where I have to ask for help when I could have 30 years earlier built something for myself that could work for me. So that I think is the smart money, is just focus on making things that you own. I'm not saying you can't do, I'm not saying that work for hire gigs are a bad idea. Everyone does work for hire. We all do work for hire. And I think work for hire can work for you, specifically if you're using that to expose yourself to new audience, to build a following, to expand your following, expand your audience. And again, I think taking whatever you have from those work for hire gigs, at least a portion, in terms of the profit, in terms of your energy, and applying that to something that you do own in the long term, I think that's the way to go. So, are comics a dead end job? Well, I think they can be if you don't play your cards right. I think, again, if you're not wise in how you use your resources, where you invest your time, your energy, and your money, it absolutely can turn into a dead end job. But again, this can kind of go for every job. Every job can turn into a dead end job if there is no vision attached to what you're making. If there is no long term strategy, yes, it can turn into a dead end job. But again, when it comes to comics, I really think making things that you own, you need to own things. This that that has been the game changer in my career. Is whenever my creator owned work has essentially built a completely new life for myself, and basically it's changed the game on my bloodline and my family. It's completely changed everything. So I am in love with creator owned work. Wherever you are in your journey, if you're just starting out or whatever, I think look into that. Even if you're looking for, even if, as much work for hire as you may have, whatever, think long term. Think about basically creating sort of a creative war chest for yourself. That's what I've been doing with myself, with my career. It's trying to create a lot of different properties, a lot of different projects, characters, and stories that I would then put into the world. And it's basically kind of like sending out a signal, and you just attract people, and you don't know what you're going to attract. Not everything is going to be a big blockbuster sales, Eisner Award winning project, but putting out as much as you can, making sure the quality's there, you're going to attract things. You're going to attract opportunities in the long term. And that's really what you need. So I hope that makes sense to you, for you guys. As I said, this was one of the most stressful, most nuanced discussions that I could have tackled, and I've wrestled with it. I've recorded this probably half a dozen times at this point. So again, I know this is not going to be a perfect one size fits all kind of solution, but I think this does summarize a lot of what I've seen in comics. We have to be wise with our talents, our energies, and what we make. And we have to be deliberate, and we need to own things for ourselves in the long term. So let me know how you guys feel about this in the comments section. I hope it was helpful as always. I like, share, subscribe, all the usual YouTubey stuff. I will see you next week. I hope this week is productive and peaceful as always, and I'll check you next week. Bye.